Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by Janet Cobb. Janet works in the nonprofit, she has worked in the nonprofit space her entire career. And since becoming a consultant about a decade ago, she's worked with about 800 small to mid sized organizations to help them do more good. So we are in for a treat. And Janet, we're really happy to have you this afternoon. Glad you were able to join. And the technical difficulties, if they do encounter, we'll work around them.
Okay, I am so sorry, everyone. I started logging on 20 minutes early, and it took me that long. So, technology, we gotta love it, and we, sometimes hate it.
Yeah.
I was just as Ashley was doing the intro, I was looking at where people were coming in from, and there's someone from El Cerrito, California, and I just have to say I grew up in Rodeo. So if you're in El Cerrito, you probably know Rodeo. So hello, Bay Area. And a few folks from Connecticut, where I'm going this weekend, right? So I love to see people from the two coasts and everywhere in between. So thank you for coming. As Ashley mentioned, I am coming in from Chicago, which is where I now reside. But let's dig in, because I know I'm 10 minutes late, so let's see what we got here and see where we're going with it. All right, so I can share my screen, correct? All right, let me make sure it is ready. Oh, shoot. Another technical difficulty, I bet. I'm trying to, I'm logged in.
If you need me to, I'm happy to share.
Let's do that, because I don't trust my computer at this point. I'm in through my browser instead of the app, and that messes up my share.
Right, all good. I will go ahead and share. No worries here. Let me get that pulled up for you. Yeah. Awesome. Are y'all seeing my screen? I don't think so, right? Here we go.
No, not yet.
Here we are.
There is some background noise too.
Interesting.
Now it's gone.
Okay, let's go ahead and see. Now you're all seeing my screen, correct?
Okay, yes, there we go.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Of course.
All right, folks. So today we're here, everyone's here to talk about how to engage your board in active fundraising. So I assume there are probably some board members here, and there are probably some non-board members. So let's just dig in and see what we can learn and take away, and hopefully you'll walk away with a few tidbits to help you really grow your good. All right. So Ashley already introduced me, so but that's a picture of me. I want to focus on the idea that we always begin with capitalizing on passion. Then we move into what's our current reality, what does the data tell us? Then we talk about other things, campaigns and events and things that the board can help us do. So that's what we're going to talk through today. All right. So capitalizing on passion. The big thing when we're talking about capitalizing on passion is the idea that board members are people who care about the cause we are engaged with, right? If they have a passion for the cause, that will go a long, long way, right? So it's not a passion for the person who's the founder. It's not a passion for some friend who asked them to join. They have to be passionate about the cause. And if they're passionate about the cause, then you can have the conversation with them. You can ask them, What does it mean for this organization to be successful? What does it mean for our fundraising efforts to be successful? What does it mean for you as a board member to be successful? You can ask them what their concerns are. You can ask them why they're involved, why they care about this cause, why agreed to join the board, why they want to participate at the level that they are currently. And the big thing when it comes to fundraising is who else can they invite to join them in this cause? So we're not talking about money so much, which is what everyone thinks right away, but we're talking about passion for a cause. And when we all have a passion for a cause and we are inviting other people who are passionate about our cause to be engaged with that cause, good things happen. Some people volunteer. Some people become employed, right? They want a job in the cause area. And other people give their money, right? Those are all three great options, great opportunities, but everybody does it differently. Everyone gets involved differently. So we want to make sure that we aren't just filling seats with warm bodies, but that the people in the seats are passionate about what we are doing. Once you have a group of passionate people, believe it or not, you have a group of passionate people, let's say there are 12, 4 of them are going to be super invested. They're going to do everything you want. They're going to be on top of their game. They are going to move everything forward. 4 of the people are likely to be disengaged. And then 4 of the people in the middle that swing back and forth. They're hit or miss. That's the nature of a group. That's the nature. I mean, think about your church groups, think about your school PTAs and those kinds of parent groups of your children. Think about anything you belong to. There's very likely a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? So what you got to do is you got to lean into the 1/3 that is super engaged and get them even more engaged, and then slowly bring in the people who are back and forth. Now, you're always going to have some people not super engaged. Doesn't mean that we're okay with it. It doesn't mean that we just let it slide, but we got to realize the more we sort of pound our heads against the brick wall to try and get them engaged, the more frustrating it is for us and it does nothing to them. So lean in, get the sort of lukewarm people fired up, and then those other folks aren't going to matter as much. So find your champions, right? When you can find the champions and get the lukewarm people warmed up, then you're going to have far more effective fundraising efforts and everything in general efforts, right? It's just going to be a more functional organization that is able to do far more good. That said, passion can only take us so far because we also need to make sure that we are offering our board members professional development. They sign up to be on a board because they're passionate about a cause or because they have a skill set they want to share or whatever reason they sort of think that they're joining, right? They chose to, even if they think, oh, I'm a good accountant, so I want to give my accounting skills to a nonprofit. There are millions. There's 1.8 million nonprofits in the United States of America. They could have picked any other 1.7999 or whatever million, but they picked you. So there's something there that's connecting them, right? So if that's the case, then that means they're willing. The question is, are they able? Do they know what it means? A lot of people who sign up to be on the board don't really know what it means. And that doesn't make them bad people. That makes them people who aren't 100% invested in the nonprofit arena. They don't know. They just know it's a good thing, so they're going to go do it. So you need to plan retreats. You need to set expectations. You need to celebrate the successes. You need to educate them and help them understand what their role is. And then you need to provide resources for them. If you want them to do something for you, like fundraise, you have to make sure that you are providing a comprehensive case for support, and then little one sheets and taglines and all the things in between that are going to help them be able to be great ambassadors for you and your cause. So comprehensive case for support, all the collateral materials that go with it, and then opportunities and occasions to introduce the organization. You've got to remind them how that goes, right? Your organization may not be top of mind for them, but if you give them little tricks and tools to better understand when they can talk about you to the people that they know, that's going to go a long way. So, very high level, we just solved the problem. We're done, right? Now let's dig in and see what does some of this mean and how does some of it work? All right? Okay. The very first thing, the very most fundamental thing that a lot of people forget when we start talking about how engaged is your board? Oh, how does your board function? Oh, is your board a good board for you? Do you, right? There's the my head is exploding. I don't want to think about it. There's the, frustration. There's some people I've worked with a lot of organizations, and some do say, oh, I have a great board. I have a great board. But generally speaking, you wouldn't be here if there wasn't some, like, I need to know more about how to engage my board. The thing in the very beginning of that conversation that so many of us forget is that board members are volunteers. And so we need to thank them and appreciate them and engage with them as we would all of our other volunteers. We have to set our expectations. This is not their paid gig. This is not their whole life. It's just not. It's something that they're offering to do, right? So we need to thank them. We need to always approach every conversation from a point of gratitude, just like we do with our volunteers and with our donors. Then I said, we need to lean in and help them know how to have conversations and have opportunities to share about the organization. So, one of the first exercises I recommend is asking them to do an actual exercise where they sit down as a group together, maybe at the annual retreat or whatever, and write down who they encounter. Who do they encounter every day? Who do they encounter every week, every month, frequently, annually, every so often at class reunions, whatever it is, right? Who do you encounter? Do you have a dog walker? Do you have a mechanic? Do you have a book club? Do you have someone you'd go on a morning walk with, a group of bicyclists that you bike with? Like, whoever it is, write all of those people down. Doesn't matter who, you don't have to think about whether or not they can be donors or whether or not they care about your cause at this point. Just your circles of influence, everybody you encounter. Then we ask ourselves, what is the opportunity? Are there buckets where different people fit as a door that can open for us to introduce or talk about the organization? So, for example, your hairdresser. We talk about all kinds of stuff with the person who does our hair, right? nonsense stuff, interesting stuff, not interesting stuff, right? But do you say, I sit on this board for this great organization, right? I'd love to tell you about it. You're not asking them for money, but you're introducing the organization. And you get a sense, oh, does this hair cutter care? Some will, some won't, right? But maybe they have an uncle who cares, right? And they can tell the uncle, right? Think about it this way. If your pickleball club and your board meeting happened or some board obligation happened at the same time, does your pickleball club know that you're on this board? And can you say, I've got a board obligation tonight. I can't make it to pickleball. Or does it usually happen the other way? That you skip the board or board members skip the board obligation because they're in pickleball, right? So ideally, all your pickleball people know that this board is important to you, right? So once you start thinking of people in that way, then you're saying, okay, I can introduce anybody to the organization, but if I'm going to start considering them as a prospect, where do they fit? Are they a person who could benefit from our programs or attend some activity? Are they people who would be interested in buying a raffle or engaging in an auction or doing a small monthly, lattes for literacy? Can you give $5 today because we're doing a big campaign kind of person? Could they become a monthly donor? Are they a good candidate for a small VIP kind of gathering where you're inviting 10 people and asking each of them to give you $1,000? All the people in our lives will fit into a different category. And if board members understand their role as board members, they're going to take that list that they created and start moving people into these buckets. And it's okay if all of their people are in the raffle auction small campaign gift bucket, or if they're in the, we have to have a gala because we have so many of these people who could be invited to a gala bucket. Okay? So that's generally speaking how you get board members thinking about how can I be a better ambassador? How can I tell more people? Who can I tell? What can we talk about? Then you need to consider your data. You need to, if you can advance the slide, please, Ashley. Yeah. So you need to think about currently what your situation is. You look at all of your donors. What is their total lifetime donation? What is their largest gift size? What is their consecutive year giving? How many years have they given to you? How many monthly donors do you have? And how many are frequent and multi-year giving donors? And when you start looking at the data in these subcategories, you're going to be able to help the board understand your capacity for fundraising. Because what a lot of people on the board might be thinking is, one, I don't know anybody with a lot of money, so I can't ask people for money, which is not true because your largest gift size and your average gift size may be very, very small, right? And, there may be someone who knows someone with a lot of money, but a lot of your donations are going to come from people who don't have a lot of money, right? The other thing is that sometimes boards will assign a fundraising goal and it's completely disconnected from this data. Right? I work with so many organizations where in the beginning of our relationship, they'll say something like, oh, we need to raise, $2 million. And I'm like, well, how much did you raise last year? Oh, 2,400. Right? So their data is not telling them that they can raise $2 million unless they do that circle of influence exercise and find lots more people to be talking to, right? So you have to look at your data, see where you are, see where the opportunities are so that you can set realistic fundraising goals. saying your board is helping to fundraise isn't a magic bullet in the sense that as soon as they're engaged, you're going to all of a sudden raise millions. You have to see the data and the circles of influence to right size your expectations about how you're going to be able to fundraise. All right. This, I'm not going to read through this list. You all can read it when you get the recording and the deck. But these are some actual metrics that you want to be considering to, again, get clarity around what parameters you will be able to fundraise. The board needs to understand this. They need to know these things so that they can right size their expectations and then be more comfortable with the idea of fundraising. The other thing that they need to understand, that we want to help them understand, is that if they're not hearing no 2 or 3 times a week, they're not asking enough, right? Like, they're not going to hear yes all the time. And that can be very deflating. It makes people feel very vulnerable if they ask people, can you become a $10 a month donor? And all they hear is no, it's going to make them feel bad. But if they understand that for every one gift they need to ask 5 or 6 people, then they understand that the success comes in the asking, not in the getting of the gift, right? The only way you can fail at fundraising, I'm going to say this and people are going to disagree, but the only real way you fail at fundraising is when you fail to fundraise, right? If you don't engage, if you don't build relationships with the people in your community who care about what you care about, then you have failed as a fundraiser. But if you are doing what you can and you are seeing some results, then you've succeeded. Even if you hear no and only 1/3 of your database gives to you. Someone the other day did a very first campaign. They've never done individual donor campaigns, and they did one and they got 2 gifts. And I was very excited for them. And they were disappointed. And so we had to talk about that, right? It's not in what other people do, it's in what you do. All right? So let's keep going here. You have to know your database, your donor base, and then you have to communicate consistently. You have to ask questions to better understand the database. You have to then create messaging to meet the audiences of the people in your database. And then you have to track what happens when you communicate to see how they are engaging. The segmenting part is important because if you're saying the same thing to everyone all the time, you're not speaking to anyone. This is where the board members come in, because if they are bringing community members to the table, they can help us understand the folks. They can answer some of the questions about who these people are. They can help us know what their interests are or what the messaging is that they need to hear. All right. Okay. Now we're going to dig into how we prepare our board, right? I've given you some things that the board members can do and how we want to treat our board members and the sort of education we need to give them around our fundraising reality, right? What is a realistic fundraising approach and goal? But let's dig in a little bit and talk a bit more about some things that are going to help them be more prepared. So one thing is, have you had the conversation about the life cycle stages of an organization? Do board members know where you fall in this life cycle? Because you communicate differently, you have different expectations, you have different people drawn to the organization depending on this story chart, right? And you may be in existence for 50 years and you may still be in the startup phase or in the growth phase, right? Or you may be a year old, but you're already at the vitality stage, right? But the big thing that we need to understand is the second half of the chart. The second half of the chart, at some point, you're going to sort of reach maturity, and there needs to be some regeneration. And if there isn't, if there aren't new ideas coming out, if there aren't new approaches, if you aren't reaching new people in your efforts, you're going to begin declining. And if you don't do something to move back to the growth stage, you're going to need to sunset, right? There's got to be a turnaround moment. And this life cycle can happen over and over and over again in an organization's, existence, right? But you are fundraising differently, and you are communicating differently, and you are making decisions differently depending on where you are. You always want to be looking for what's the next regeneration, what's the next turnaround. That's the board member's responsibility. So if you can engage them in that through the strategic planning process, then they're going to feel more ownership in what is happening in the organization. They're going to be motivated to want to reach the goals that they themselves are setting. Then we have to talk about meetings. Do you have I'm board meetings where everybody dreads it, where you're thinking, oh, I have to spend hours printing and collating and distributing reports, and nobody's going to read them, and nobody wants to come to this meeting because all we do is read the reports that I sent a week ago that everybody was supposed to read? Sound familiar? Or next slide is, do you have the hop on board and do great things meetings? Do you have the meetings that boost the morale and improve board engagement and increase their excitement? How do you do that, you ask? That's what we'll talk about. One thing that's very important, if you don't already have it, is your remote preparation for the meeting should include a consent agenda process. And the consent agenda process at the very beginning might be hard to implement. I can hear people saying, because I've heard it for decades now, oh, I send them everything, but nobody looks. That's because at the meeting, because nobody looked, you go ahead and read it all anyway. But if you stick to your guns and don't go back on the fact that you've all agreed to implement the consent agenda, and anything that is not presented as a very specific agenda item isn't talked about, it's not reviewed, they should have read it ahead of time and come with their questions, right? So the way that it works is the minutes are prepared, the agenda is prepared, the draft agenda is prepared, committee chairs submit updates, staff people compile documents, there's a packet that's distributed. Everybody reads all of those reports. They all are given the opportunity to submit clarifying questions or ask that something be moved off of the consent agenda onto the discussion agenda, but not the whole report, just specific items from any of the reports. Though anything that someone submits gets put onto the discussion agenda, and then the final agenda is sent. The meeting opens with acceptance of the consent agenda, and you're good to go. You've just cut out 2 hours of your meeting, and your meeting only needs to last an hour, because then what happens is you engage in interesting, enriching, educational, exciting things that are moving the organization forward. Because you are operating from a clear vision and mission. You have engineered that from your strategic plan, right? You've had your annual retreat. You know where you're going and how you're getting there, right? That's all done already. So then the reports that you're sending out into the consent agenda, those are educating them on the current status of what's happening. It's engaging them because they need to read them. to be able to move line items to the discussion agenda. Then on the day of the meeting, you're creating excitement because this is going to be a great meeting where people feel good when they leave, right? You're making sure that they all feel appreciated. You're making sure that there's some good refreshments if that's part of your culture. You're making sure that your mission moments and how you're, asking them to write thank you notes or whatever you're doing to actually engage them in the process of moving the organization forward, learning the impact and appreciating donors. That's all getting ready, and you're all set for that to happen at the beginning of the meeting. And then on the agenda are different points where you are enlightening them and equipping them. So what does that mean? That means you're enlightening them because you are presenting a case study from about your cause area. You're enlightening them by giving them, asking someone to come in and do a little board development around fundraising, engage them in learning how to tell better stories, engaging them in learning how to do an ask, or more involved in the cause area, right? Educating them about trends in your cause area or what other organizations around the country are doing, that sort of thing. And you're also equipping them with what they need to take action between this meeting and the next meeting. You're going to give them collateral materials. You're going to give them very specific things to do that they understand, that they're excited about, and that they feel equipped to handle. And at every board meeting, there is some focus on fundraising, right? You're going to make sure that you're helping them understand how their roles can align with their skills and their comfort level, that no one has to do something they're totally not comfortable with, but at the same time, you're guiding them beyond their comfort zone through training, right? You're helping them learn or asking them to do research for you. You're asking them to make phone calls. You could ask a board member to simply pick up the phone or send out emails to set coffee dates with the executive director, right? I mean, I know that's a staff thing, but if you don't have a staff, that's where board members can step in, right? You're asking them to invite others to events, right? There's lots of things you can be doing for like 10 minutes of every board meeting that absolutely makes sure that everyone at some point is focusing on fundraising. Then you can take it a step further. Once you have capitalized on the passion, leaned into those who are fully engaged, help them all consider the data to right size expectations, given them a good experience of board meetings and being on the board and what that means. They feel empowered. They feel like they've received professional development. Then you say, now let's do a peer-to-peer campaign, right? And a peer-to-peer campaign, you're going to ask them to reach out to their networks, right? It doesn't have to all happen at once. Most people are still familiar with Facebook fundraisers around your birthday. My birthday fundraiser, because Facebook pushes it out. It's your birthday. Do you want to raise money for an organization, right? A peer-to-peer campaign is that. So maybe you ask every board member to create a campaign during the month of their birthday. That means probably every month or so you have someone fundraising on your behalf, right? So it can happen simultaneously. It could be around a Giving Tuesday or a regional giving day or an important day or event for the organization, or it could be serially, or it could be random when the mood hits them for whatever reason, right? It could be based on something they're good at, right? Like maybe they love to knit. Could they host a knitting circle and ask people to donate $10 each, or any of those sorts of things? Could they do a paint and sip night? Could they Just have people in their homes and ask everybody for $1,000. Everyone's situation is going to be different. And when you are able to help the board understand that their campaign or their way of reaching out can absolutely fit their personality and the way their friends operate, then you're going to have far more success than if you're trying to get all of them to do the same thing all the time. All right. This is basically a few things that you want to remember when you're asking board members to reach out to their networks. You want to make sure that they get to set their goals, right? Because you want them to feel successful. And if you come to them and you say every board member needs to raise $1,000, and that makes me hesitate because I think maybe I could raise 800, but there's no way I'm getting to 1,000, I'm going to shut down. But if you go to everyone and say, how much do you think that you can raise for the organization from your family and friends? And I say, oh, 500. I'm pretty confident I could raise 500. Then I go and try and raise the 500 I'm pretty confident I can raise, right? Maybe next time I'll stretch it, right? So it's always letting them be in their comfort zone while slowly through all the other things you're doing, getting them beyond that comfort zone. Then you have to make sure you have the technology set up to manage it. Then you have to make sure you have the messaging, which you should already have because of everything else we've talked about. And then you have to make sure that you are thanking them and supporting them and have what they need, that they have what they need to thank their donors. You always want to make sure they have the materials and resources they need. I'm not going to, dig into that slide or that one. It's just specific examples of what I've said. In Network for Good, it is a very clear 3-step process. And most technology, they do have these processes. You've got to figure out how you're recruiting, the resources they need, and then the whole thank you process. You want to make sure that you are helping people understand that it is about inspiring community and collective generosity. It's not a peer-to-peer campaign can be about money, but that is not the biggest focus most of the time, right? When you need to raise really big money, you need to have one-on-one conversations. It's a much longer, more strategic process. A sort of crowdfunding peer-to-peer campaign is about just getting everybody rallying around this cause. Events I want to spend a moment on. And Ashley, I should ask you, are we wrapping up at 1 or 10 after 1?
We can wrap up at 1 or a little after. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll push through here. Let's dig into some events. I think it's really important because a lot of boards, when they think of fundraising, they think of events. And when they think of events, they think of galas. And galas are one of the least effective means to fundraise. There are purposes for galas, right? But know that they're not the only thing we're talking about when we're talking about getting board members engaged in events. So there are, to me, 4 different categories. There's the one-off niche activities like 5Ks and trivias and music festivals where people come because of the activity and they barely even know who's running it. Okay? Great source of funding, sometimes a nightmare to organize. So know what you're getting into because these folks are not likely to become longtime donors. Then there's the mission-focused direct ask kind of events, and these can be totally virtual, like crowdfunding and email. They could be direct mail. They could be you know, an in-person kind of gathering, but it is very mission focused. Everyone knows exactly why they're there, right? Then there's the invitation only. And VIP, I like to use the acronym to say very invested people. These are the people who are invested in your cause or who you believe would be invested if they were invited, right? You don't charge ticket prices. You don't have silent auctions. It's not a big ordeal. It's a simple house party invitation where board members invite their family and friends or their colleagues to hear from the organization, learn what it's about, and know that they're going to be asked to support by the end. And then there's those large mission focused things that are the galas and the auctions, and there's a mission moment, and there's usually, the ED or the board chair, somebody talks. People are more likely to know the organization throwing that than the one-off ones like the 5Ks and the trivia nights. So help the board think broader when they think about events. So to recap, we need a team of passionate people, right? A team of passionate people will fundraise because fundraise becomes less about asking for money and more about being ambassadors for the cause and finding people who care about what you care about and nurturing those relationships. You want to motivate them with a strong case for support and plenty of training. You want to let them set their own goals and encourage them and constantly ask them how you can support them to hit their fundraising goals, whatever those are. You're going to provide resources, and then you're always going to follow up to see how, when they engage with people, you are slowly building that relationship more so they might convert from being aware of your organization to supporting it in some way. Oh, I don't have a question slide. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Oh, so
All
that was my
good.
recap. Yeah, let's stop sharing the screen then. And then were there any questions that came up?
Yeah, we have a question that came through from Diane. Diane asked, um, specifically at those invitation only VIP events, would you recommend also doing an ask at those events to those attendees?
Well, you can have two different kinds. One would just be awareness raising, but yes, many of those VIP events are very clearly asking for money. You invite people, and I've seen it everywhere from, I'm going to have a backyard barbecue. Everybody pay $50 and we're going to donate the money, right? To, I'm inviting 6 couples and I'm going to ask them each for $120,000, right? so it can run the gamut. You have to figure out who your audience is.
Absolutely. We also had a question come in from Tanya. Tanya asked, what is a good percentage of total fundraising to come from board members and their networks? Is there kind of a rough estimate or numbers that folks should aim for?
I think what you're aiming for is 100% board participation in giving. And there are schools of thought about this. There are some very popular, well-known consultants who would say time is money, and therefore board members should not be expected to give monetarily. I personally am from a different school of thought, which says every board member should give something monetarily, but it does not necessarily need to be a lot. I will say a dime is giving money if that's what the person can give. And only they can decide what they can give, right? But in the American culture, the giving over of money creates a different dynamic. And so you You can fundraise more authentically, asking people to join you to make a monetary gift if you've given a monetary gift. So, because boards are so broad, there's no sort of percentage, but I would say your overall fundraising pie, individual giving needs to be, you know, at least a third, ideally, in a perfect world, a third of your overall, grants and foundations and grants, individual giving, and then corporations or events or those sorts of things, right? So that's your breakdown.
Yeah. And while we wait for some more questions to come in through, while we have Janet here for a couple minutes, folks, if you are interested in learning more about specifically our tools and services and how they can kind of help you all collect the data that might be needed to kind of reinvigorate or just invigorate your board altogether, I'm going to launch another quick poll here at the end here. Please feel free to fill that out. And like I mentioned earlier, we'll have one of our colleagues reach out to you to initiate those conversations, kind of get some more knowledge about your organization and where you all are at and how we can help you. So I'll leave that up for a couple more seconds here while folks fill that out. But it looks like we have a question coming from Corinne. And Corinne asked that they have a board member that has not fully come aware that they're responsible for fundraising. How do you make that transition without necessarily alienating, excuse me,
Alienating.
certain board members?
So ideally, because if every board meeting has a fundraising focus, then they should start getting the message. But also, you want every year for each board member to sign a sort of agreement of what they are going to do. Are they going to be an ambassador? Are they going to be a connector? Are they going to ask for money? What is it that they're going to do? So if you do that annually and then revisit quarterly to see how everyone's doing against their own goals, then that's when those conversations happen. So you're not pointing a finger at any one person. Everyone is going through that process.
Awesome. And our last question, I think you kind of just answered it. That was very similar from Hannah. So, folks, feel free to get in your last minute questions here while we have her for a couple more minutes here. But I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat, Janet. Lots of thanks rolling through. Lots of, this was an excellent presentation as usual. No surprise there. But folks on the line, again, thank you so much for your patience while we navigated some of those technical difficulties and also me being on mute. Janet, you missed it. I was on mute.
Oh, no.
So we had a bit of technical difficulties, folks, but thank you all for your patience. Thank you so much for your time and attention this afternoon.
And
it's always
also,
appreciated.
I'd like to say if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, I'm there. You can find me. I'm happy to connect and answer questions and things. So
Awesome. Well, folks, thank you so much again for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you at our next session. Janet, thank you again for hopping in this afternoon and all the great work that
my name
you
is
do.
Janet Cobb. Sorry, someone asked in the
Oh,
Q&A.
I see here.
Janet Cobb, and my website is janetmarycobb.com.
Here we go. I'll go ahead and drop that in the chat really quick. Here it is. Perfect. Feel free to grab that, folks, for the next couple of seconds. But yes, Janet, thank you again. Always a wealth of information, always such a great session and great presentation, and lots of great tidbits for folks to take back to their board. And folks, I hope you engaged your board with some of this information as well.
Thank you, Ashley.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you all. We hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, and we definitely hope to see you at our next session. Bye, everyone.